back to another episode of In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is another beautiful day to be in the kitchen. And today I want to share with you my recipe as my mother taught me how to make a quick and easy version of pickled beets and no canning required. So these pickled beets with some sliced onions, we add a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of sugar. And today we will not be pulling out our canner. Not today. Today we're going to be doing the quick and easy version. Now, before we jump into the video, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and stay tuned and I'll walk you through my steps on how to make these quick and easy, mama approved pickled beets. Now, the ingredients you need to make your pickled beets are fairly basic, fairly simple, fairly standard. You need, of course, first of all, we need beets. And these beets have the tops attached. Now, if these were fresh and actually I bought these the other day, but if they were fresh and just pulled, dug out of the ground, you can eat the tops. They remind you so much of a cross between Swiss chard and spinach. You can saute them just like you would any other green, and they're delicious. But I'm just going to cut the tops off on these, cut the bottoms off, peel them, give them a good scrub, peel them, and then get them ready to go. And here I have 3 large beets, and you do want to give them a good scrub, a really good scrub, because beets, they grow underground and they are, they usually a little gritty. And since we're pickling, you need vinegar. And here I just have plain white 5% distilled, 5% acidity distilled vinegar. And there's no need for anything fancy if you're pickling. This is really the best and the most affordable option for pickling. Now, for some added nutrition, I'll add in probably about maybe a teaspoon or 2 of raw apple cider vinegar to my beets, just because I want to kind of increase, like some probiotics in my beets. You don't have to. It's totally optional. You can leave it out. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. It'll still be good. And then here I have a Asian vinegar. It's a sweet fermented vinegar. Very good, but very strong. So you only need maybe a 1/4 teaspoon to a 1/2 teaspoon. If you've never used this before, start off with a 1/4 teaspoon and kind of taste your pickling liquid, and you can add just a extra if you think you need it. By the way, this is not gluten-free because it does have rice bran, as does most ingredients like this. So if you are gluten-free, you want to skip this all together. And if you don't have it or you don't want it, you can skip it all together. I'm just going to add it in mine because I kind of like the flavor that it gives to pickled things. And then, of course, since we're talking about pickled beets, you will need some sugar. My mama always added sugar to her pickled beets. Now, there's no need for anything fancy for this either. Just plain pure cane granulated sugar is perfect for this, and it works the best, and it's the most affordable. There's no need for organic and all those other things. Not for this recipe. You also need some salt. Now, I have here some kosher salt. This is coarse kosher salt, and it has no additives. You can also use, there's a salt that they sell in the canning section. It's called pickling salt. Pretty much the same thing, and you can use that as well. Don't use your regular table salt that contain iodine. Don't use that for any pickling or canning recipes whatsoever, because the iodine additives can actually start to tamper with your canning, and the results are usually not very pleasant. So any type of canning that you're doing, whether you're doing vegetables or you're making, pickles or whatever, always use a plain, no additive added salt. And I'm going to throw some sliced onions in my pickled beets because I like the onions. And you can also add in a few, if you want something spicy, you can also add in a few sliced jalapeno pepper rings. And of course, since we're canning, we will need canning jars. And I have pints and I have the 8-inch gem jars. Now, you can do all of one size, it doesn't matter. But one thing I have learned, when you're doing experimental flavors, because any of these two, the jalapeno peppers and the onions, you don't have to add them. Mama didn't add either of these to her pickled beets. It was just beets and nothing else. But I like to add the onions in mine because it just gives it a nice little flavor. And then you can eat the onions too. But if you are not sure about whether or not you will like something that you might be adding in, say you want to add in some celery seeds, or you want to add in some caraway seeds, or you want to add in a strip of orange zest to your pickled beets, that will be delicious. Save things like that for your small jars, and we can call these your experimental jars. And by the way, you just want to experiment with added in flavors like bay leaves or pickling spice. If you haven't tried that and you want to know whether or not I would like pickling spice, save your small jars for things like that. And don't start experimenting with your basic ingredients that you need. Don't start reducing the vinegar and because then you start tampering with the things that actually make it pickled. So just experiment with add-ons and not with the basics. And I do want to say something about the sugar. You can reduce sugar in the pickled beets, and I'll leave the recipe in the comment section below. But say, you want to use half the amount of sugar, you can. Now, you don't want to skip the sugar altogether, because even though beets are fairly sweet naturally on their own, say if you roasted these beets and you ate them, you're like, these are really good. I don't need no sugar. And you probably don't for that type of method with beets. But if you don't add some sugar to it, they will be very sour and not very pleasant. So you can reduce the sugar. But since there is quite a bit of vinegar in these, you do not want to omit the sugar altogether. And you will need canning jar lids. And these are safe for canning. If you buy a pack of jars, typically they'll have the lids. And the reason why I say typically is because during lockdown, there were some stores that were selling a lot of jars and didn't even have rings and lids. So it was just, apparently the manufacturers couldn't keep enough of them. So stores were selling jars with no lids. But hopefully yours do have lids and rings. And these are washed and ready to go. And these are safe for canning because they have a coating on them where the vinegar or anything like the salt or whatever won't start to cause the lids to rust or anything from the acid. You may need a veggie peeler because we will be peeling the beets, and you also need a couple other canning things that are fairly basic. Here I have a funnel it helps you get your ingredients in the jar. If you canned before, you probably have some of these things already in your pantry, and if you have never canned before, these are just easy, basic, simple, cheap things that you would buy, and then you just use them over and over again, and you don't really need to, it's nothing expensive. So no fancy equipment. We also need a pot, we need a colander, and we need some water, and pretty much that's it. So I'm going to step over to the sink. I'm going to cut the tops off of these beets, cut off the root end, and going to give them a good scrub and get them peeled and ready to cut up to go in our jars. I'm just gonna peel mine in a small bowl. Now, one thing I do want to say about peeling beets is, you notice I will be wearing gloves for the duration of this video, as long as I am working with the beets, because beets does stain, but it's not a permanent stain, and eventually, after maybe about 10 minutes or so, it comes off your hands. Now, if like when me and my mother was canning, and we would have huge 5-gallon tubs of beets to can, which I loved canning beets with my mom. I really did. We would do I think we did 60 quarts of pickled beets in a day one time, and we had a bumper crop. Thank the Lord it was a bumper crop that year. We had beets every which way, and we canned every last one of those beets. And I remember not only were our fingers permanently red for a while, because if you keep your hands in beets for a very long time, as we did, I mean, we were peeling and chopping and peeling and chopping for the longest. And if you keep your hands in beets for a long time like that, they will have a stain that may last for maybe like a day or so, and then it fades away. But we love pickled beets, and me and Mama we would sit down in the dining room, and we would pull up chairs and get trash cans ready and peel those beets and cut them up, and the canner would be going, and when one batch came out, another batch was ready to go in. Me and Mama did a lot of canning, and she loved canning. She actually taught me to can. Okay, so all of our beets are peeled. I wish they were canned that fast. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And I'm just gonna rinse off my hands. Now I'm ready to start cutting my beets up into the size that I want. And I do want to say something about peeling beets. Mother taught me to peel my beets before I start canning them. Now, some people prefer to, before I start cooking them, I meant to say. Some people prefer to leave the peel on and then boil the whole beet and then rub the peel off. You can do that. But Mama discovered after years of pickling beets that it's better if you do it this way. And there's a couple of reasons. Number one, we are pickling these beets. We're not just boiling them and putting them in a jar. Now, if you were just going to boil them and put beets in a jar just for preserving, just plain beets, the color will bleed and you will have some kind of pale off colored beets, because the color, literally, the more you cook them, the more the color washes out. But when you add vinegar or an acid to anything like this, it makes the color get stronger in it. It's kind of like the same thing when you're making dye or anything, which that's a whole other topic. But the vinegar enhances the color. So peeling them before you start cooking them doesn't remove or cause more of the color to bleed. And another thing that I will show you as we go along, Mama used her cooking water from her beets along with her vinegar, and I'll show you what I mean by that. But if you're concerned about the color bleeding out of your beets, yes, some color will bleed, but when you add the vinegar to it, you'll see that the color in the beets will actually get stronger otherwise. So I want to kind of decide how I want my beets cut, and this is entirely up to you. You can do cubes, you can do dices, you can do slices. I think I am going to do dices. So I'm going to cut my beets up into size, and the dice size that you want depends entirely on how you like to eat them. So for this, I think I'm going to cut this way, and then just dice it just like that. You can cut this again, but then you start getting really tiny dice, although I might go ahead and cut it in half. Yeah, set it down. Always be cautious when you are working with a knife, because at the end of the day, we are cutting the food, and we don't want to cut anything but the food. So always practice all the proper safety tips when you are cooking. Because beets are always different shapes because they grow underground and they bump into rocks or they bump into roots or whatever. No two beets will ever be alike. So you kind of have to start deciding as you're cutting, how you cut one beet may not work for the next beet. Okay. That way. And yes, beets are hard. They are not as hard as something like a butternut squash, which are extremely hard, but they are hard. Now that's another thing. If you find your beets too hard to cut, like this, raw, if you do boil them before you cut them and before you peel them, then they will be a lot softer for you to cut. If you think that, you know, for your hands or whatever, they're just too hard to cut into, go ahead and let them boil and cook. And then they'll be very tender and you can cut them easily that way. Some cooks prefer to use small beets, which those are ideal for pickling if you are going to pickle them whole. You do like small baby beets, they're called. And I like those. I remember Mama liked them as big as she could get them, because Mama felt like, why bother with tiny baby beets? And you can cut a large beet up into the size that you want. So Daddy always left them in the ground and let them get bigger. So while I am in the chopping stage, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hop on my onions. The reason why I don't want to slice them too thin is because they can kind of start to disappear in your pickled beets. And I like to fish them out and cook them. Eat them. So I'm also going to thinly slice my pepper rings. Well, actually not quite so thinly. There we are. And a good reason to go ahead and cut this up is I still have gloves on. And this can, and the onion is getting to my eyes. So before I start crying on camera, I'm going to set my onions and my peppers aside, and I'm going to go ahead and get my beets in the pot and get them ready for cooking. And I'm actually going to use my Instant Pot, so we'll do that next. All right, beets are peeled and ready to go. Now, I will be cooking these in my Instant Pot simply because it goes a lot faster in an Instant Pot. Beets do take a while to cook. Now, we are going to boil these beets in plain water. Do not add anything at this point. No salt, no sugar. Definitely do not add any vinegar. Just plain water. I'm going to put those into my pot. And then I'm going to add enough plain cold water to cover. So just pour the water in. Splash the cook, because it don't matter. She's cooking anyway. Now, I'm just going to add enough water to cover. The reason why is these beets don't need to be swimming in a ton of water. And we are going to use some of this water along with our vinegar for our pickling liquid. So you don't want to dilute it with a whole lot of water, and it is not necessary. And another reason why is, since I'm cooking these in my Instant Pot, and that is a pressure cooker doesn't lose a lot of liquid. So the liquid that goes in for things like this is usually the liquid you come out with minus, some evaporation. Now, I want to get back to why we're cooking these in plain water right now. It's because the acid from vinegar or salt or anything like that can slow your beets down and stop them from cooking. It's kind of like if you ever, beans and things like that. They always tell you don't add anything. Just cook beans for the first hour, dry beans. Cook them for the first hour in just plain water. The same thing goes for beets. Now, I remember when I started doing these on my own, and thought I was grown and didn't listen, and it took the longest for those beets. And I remember those beets boiled for about maybe 2 hours on the stove, and they were so hard. But that's because I added orange juice and vinegar to them when they were raw, and it took them so long to cook. So don't make my mistake. Cook your beets first in plain water. And then once they are fork tender, and they're tender because if you stick a fork in them, and they're nice and soft. Now, that's another thing you do want to keep in mind. Beets at this stage, when you cook them, that is as tender as they will be. They will not continue to tenderize once you add your pickling liquid, and then if you're going to process them in the water bath canner, they do not continue to soften. So cook them until you are comfortable with the doneness, because they will not continue to cook, or they will not continue to soften anymore once you add that acid to them, such as the vinegar. So as tender as you want them at this stage is what you want to do. So I'm going to put these in my Instant Pot. I'm going to bring it up to temperature. I'm going to let them cook in my Instant Pot. And when they are done, I'll come back and we will use the cooking liquid from our cooked beets to make our pickling liquid. So stay tuned for that. Now it's time to make the pickling liquid. This is actually my favorite part. So to start off with, you need the vinegar, and we have the leftover cooking water from our beets. And you see how it turned a nice color. Now, don't ever use the very bottom of the pickling liquid, because sometimes there is a little bit of grit at the bottom. Even though with all the scrubbing and the washing, there's still a little grit at the bottom. So we won't use all of that. So pour some in. And I think, let's have a look and see, about 1.5 cups. So I'm going to put this in here. And just for the ease of seeing, I'm using a tiny clear bowl. Anytime you're cooking and you're pickling, by the way, always use stainless steel, because vinegar can react with other things and turn things rather unpleasant. So always use stainless steel. And while the liquid is warm, excuse me, always work with it while it's warm because your ingredients dissolve better. I'm going to add about, maybe not quite a teaspoon of salt. Doesn't take much salt. You can always add more salt, but you cannot take away the salt. And it's time to add the sugar. So I'm going to start off with 1/2 cup of sugar. As I say, if you want to reduce it, you can. So I'm going to start off by adding a little less, and that's about 1/3 cup of sugar. And I need just a little whisk to mix this up. Now, once you add the vinegar, it all could change, and you might decide, ooh, that's very sour. I need a little bit more sugar. So give that a whisk, whisk. And you can see how the liquid looks now. It's not very bright. And you can see how our beets are cooked, but you see how the beets look a little off color. They're not that deep, vibrant color. And that is because we haven't added any vinegar. So now let's go ahead and add some vinegar. So I'm going to start off with about 1.5 cups, because we're doing 1-to-1 for this. And you can take some of the leftover liquid and put some boiled eggs in here. Do the same thing, put them in a jar, and you'll have pretty beet pickled eggs. So there's that. So we've added the vinegar. Now at this point, this is the point where you want to taste it. And this doesn't matter whether you were making, me and Mama did them the same way. Whether we were making a small amount or a large amount, these steps doesn't matter. You would just be doing this in a large pot rather than a small bowl. So now, after you have everything properly stirred in, taste your liquid and see if you're happy with it. Ooh, thank you, Jesus. It smells strong. I think I want a little bit more sugar. As a matter of fact, I do want more than 1/2 cup. So I'm going to measure this out so I don't get lost. 1/4 cup is 4 tablespoons. So I'm going to measure out. That's 2 tablespoons. And add it in. You can kind of play with it a little bit. All right, that should be stirred in. Okay, so let's have another taste. Thank you, Jesus. That's nice. That's real nice. Okay, that's real nice. Okay, that's real good. By the way, that totals up to 3/4 cup of sugar. So I've added my beets back into the pot that I cooked them in. No need to wash the pot, just put them back in here. You just want to make sure there wouldn't be any little sediment at the bottom of the pot. Because like I say, beets can hold on to sediment, so even after we wash and give them a good scrub. Now we do want to heat this back up. And the same thing applies. I'm just going to pour my pickling liquid in. The same thing applies for if we were getting ready to process these in a water bath canner. You would bring your mixture back up to heat because you obviously you can't put cooled items into hot jars. And also too, letting them simmer a little bit on the stove with the pickling liquid in it kind of helps build and strengthen and marry the flavors of everything that you have in here. So we're going to put these back on the stove and bring it up to a boil before we put it into our jars. So now we have our beets and they are ready, and as you can see they are hot. So perfect for putting into our canning jars. And before we ladle in the cooked beets with the pickling liquid, I do want to go ahead and add in those little extra flavorings that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to add in 1/4 teaspoon of a fermented vinegar. Actually, that was 1/2 teaspoon. Won't hurt nobody. And I'll add in a teaspoon of my apple cider vinegar. So I add that in. This is purely optional. I just like to do it because it just increases the flavor. It does increase the sourness. So at this point, your beets will probably be a little more tangy than you want. You can always sprinkle a little extra sugar in the jar to offset that if you want to. And to the jar, I'm going to go ahead and start adding my onion pieces that I sliced up earlier. So put those in. And just put them in there. You can cram them in the jar as you add in the beets. And I'm going to go ahead and grab one of my little jars. Add a few onion slices to my little jar. And add in a few jalapeno pepper rings down in there. And that will make it nice and spicy. Okay, now let's go ahead and start to ladle the beets and the liquid into the jar. Now, as I say, you add in your onion slices in stages, so you don't put it all in at once, because you'll have to wait till you get down to the bottom of the jar before you get some onion. Okay. And you can see how useful this funnel is. Now, I have a tendency to overfill my jars of my jars of anything, anytime I'm canning. So just take some of those back out. That's a little more than that one needs. And a good rule of canning is to have your jars, fill your jars with the solids before you top it off with the liquids, because you may need a little bit of the liquid to distribute between your other two jars. So that's those in there, and then let's go ahead and add in those. Okay, shake down, there we are. Okay, and then let's add the remainder in here. And another good rule of canning thumb is to always have more jars than you think you will need, because even though you may think, oh, I only need 5 jars for this, there's nothing worse when you're canning is to get to the middle of it, or at least get to filling all the jars and then realize, I just need that one extra jar. So I'm going to put another pepper ring in here. We're going to make this jar really spicy. Another piece of onion. And then I think I can fit a little bit more into this jar, because I've got just a few beets left. Not enough for a whole nother jar, but enough to distribute between these jars. So go ahead and add the rest. Push it down there. Okay. And the last few beets. And canning is fun. Is it easy? I mean, it depends on your perspective of work. It is work, like anything else that you do in a kitchen, but it's There's two things about canning to keep in mind that makes it very different from regular cooking. Number one, canning is seasonal. Unless, you're buying, some produce from the market or something. Other than that, this is something that you only would be doing when these kinds of things are in season. And another thing about canning is it's a necessary work because you can preserve your harvest. You can preserve, some of the, the summer, or if there's something that you really, really like, you can make it yourself. So that's one of the many benefits of canning. And once you start canning, you'll be canning a little bit of everything. Okay, now we can top off the jars. Actually, let me move that one out of the way so you can have a good clear picture. You top off your jars. So there. Don't overfill. Always leave some head space. And I'll explain, if you're curious, what head space is. Okay, and then let's get the little one. Not forget about the little. I think the little one may be overfilled. Okay. Let's set that aside. And always take a clean spoon and just push down, because you want to make sure everything is below the liquid. So just give it a little push down and make sure everything is hot too. That's another thing to keep in mind. Make sure everything is hot. Even though we're not going to be processing these in a water bath canner, you do want to make sure that things are hot, because it helps the flavors to get jump start better. Now, if I was going to put these in my canner to process them, I would take my, this is I was telling you about earlier, you glide it around the inside of the jar and just make sure your food is properly packed, and make sure that there are no air bubbles remaining inside of the jar, because the air bubbles, if there are too many, there will be some air bubbles, so don't obsess about it. If there are too many, they can possibly cause your jar not to seal properly. So just take that and go back around and then push it back down again. Make sure everything is pushed down under the liquid as much as possible, especially if you're going to can them. And where the neck of the jar is on the inside is where you start talking about your headspace. So if you notice the rings around the jars, not only are they there for you to apply your lids, they're also there for you to kind of gauge your headspace. So right now I am at a half an inch or an inch headspace, or half an inch headspace. And then if I go up to this ring here, that will be a 1/4 inch headspace. And the headspace simply depends on what you are canning. I'm actually going to give these just a little bit more liquid. So if I was doing, say, something like a jam that's very solid and it's not something loose like this, I would leave a 1/4 inch headspace, because it's a compacted thing. Jam, it's not like loose like this. So you want to leave as little headspace as possible. Don't leave no headspace, because that's your things won't seal properly. But since this is a loose liquid, I'm going to leave a half an inch headspace. And keep your jars wiped off, because that keeps them nice and clean, and make sure that you get a good seal. And now let's add on the lids. Thank you, Jesus. That's what my mother taught me to say. Whenever she was closing up a jar, she would always say, "Ooh, that's hot." She would always say, "Thank you, Jesus." Following in my mama's footsteps. Okay. And there they are sealed. You're done. How easy was that? Now, to process these, and you would do this while they were hot, you would lower these back into the water that you sterilize your jars in. Just put them back into the pot, bring the water back up to a boil, and you will boil these. When the water starts to boil, set a timer for 10 minutes, and you will boil these on high for 10 minutes. And And then once they were finished, you would just take your jar lifter and remove them and set them somewhere until the jars start to seal. Now, how do you know your jar has properly sealed? Well, there's a little button at the top of these canning rings, and when you push it, you hear a little pop on the inside. If you hear that, your jar has not sealed. If you see that, your jar has not sealed. If, however, this little button at the top is flat and smooth, your jar has properly sealed. Now, since we are not going to be processing these, and we're going to be putting these in the refrigerator, I'm not worried so much about the jars sealing. I'm just going to be sticking them in the refrigerator, so I'm not worrying about processing them and making sure they're shelf stable. The reason why you process things is so the canned goods can go on the shelf without being refrigerated. That's the whole point of canning with the water bath or the pressure canner method. But I'm just going to stick these jars in the refrigerator and keep them, and they will be ready to eat in about maybe a week to 2 weeks. Now, you say, I thought you said it was quick. That depends on the flavor that you want. You can eat these in a couple of days. However, the flavors will be a little bit stronger and more tasty if you wait a little bit. Kind of like when you're making quick cucumber pickles. You don't want to turn around and eat them the same day. They wouldn't have that much taste. So I'm just going to put these once they cool completely, which would probably be later on today, maybe tomorrow morning. And then I'll put them in the refrigerator and let them sit there for maybe about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how fast. We'll probably tuck into the little one before we tuck into the big one. And let them hang out. And they will be ready to eat. You can eat them straight out of the jar. You can eat them on a salad. You can eat them, as part of an accompaniment to say, like tacos or something, which that would be delicious because any kind of pickle goes good with things like that. Chili, some good, really hearty stews. Pickles typically go good with things like that. So you can serve these with whatever you want, and they will be delicious because beet pickles are always delicious, and I never turn down a good beet pickle. Now that all our jars are finished and they were ready to set aside to let the flavors develop, I want to show you a jar that I made earlier. Now these are tiny whole beets. Some of them are whole and some of them I sliced with onion, just as we made them today. And I want to show you what they look like once you let them set for a little while and you let all the flavors. And by the way, you see how nice and dark the color is? So even though they may look a little pale when you start, that vinegar will revive them and they will turn a nice, rich, dark, deep red color, that's a good seal. That's the mark of a pickled beet. By the way, if you don't hear that pop and you don't feel a resistance when you remove your lid, that's a good way to know whether you've had a good seal or not. It should have some resistance, and you should be able to hold the jar just by the lid itself, just like this, without the seal ring. And I do want to say, I store my jars without the seal ring. So once the jar seals and I wait for maybe about a week or so, when I water bath can them, I remove the seal ring and then I'll use it for another jar. You cannot reuse the lid, but you can reuse the little ring. The ring is no longer needed once the jar is finished processing and is sealed and it's good to go and you know you had a good seal. You don't need the ring anymore. As a matter of fact, you should remove it because it can create some rust, and it also makes it a little difficult to get the lid off. So let's go ahead and take out some of our pickled beets and onions. Here's some onion and some beets, and you can see the color. The color is just beautiful. Thank you, Jesus. Oh, I'm making a mess. I love pickled beets. They are so good. They're really good just to eat out of the jar. especially the little tiny ones. And yes, I did take the time to peel beets of this size. Yes, I did. So if you're not that obsessive, you see though why my mama wanted the large beets and not the little teeny baby beets. Mama would never have bothered with those tiny little beets. But let's give them a taste. Let's see what we think. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna get the tiny one. The tiny ones are perfect for sampling. They smell so good. They smell so earthy too. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. That's delicious. These are delicious on a salad. That's typically the way we eat them. That's so good. So yummy. And in this jar, I have pickled beet relish, which is similar but slightly different. And this is delicious on hot dogs with, you know, the eggs where you add the mayo and the pickles and all those. Serve a little bit of this on top. This is delicious. Once again, on tacos, because I love pickled things like a pico de gallo or whatever. But pickled beets would be good on there too. And these are just shredded beets that you shred in the food processor. And you make them pretty much the same way we made these today. And there are recipes online for pickled beet relish, but that's what that's called, pickled beet relish. And I put it up in a jar. We use it just like hot dog relish or something like that. So I hope you've enjoyed this little video on quick and easy pickled beets, no canning required. And if you like this kind of content and you look forward to seeing more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to doing more canning videos to show you, you know, little tips on canning, what my mother taught me and I can perhaps pass on to you, or perhaps you have some canning tips and comments that you can leave. Feel free to drop those comments down below and you can share them with others. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please give us a thumbs up, and the Lord willing, I will see you again in another video. In the meantime, you know what I always say, if you make it from scratch in your own kitchen, you know it's gonna be good. Take care, y'all, and keep on cooking and canning. See you next time. Bye.